Moss belongs to a genre of games with no official name, but that are often called metagames. Metagames are characterized by breaking the fourth wall to allow direct interaction between the in-game characters and the player. This is one of my favorite genres, but it's also quite rare, with only 9 entries that I'm aware of, discounting sequels. Most of these have very small dev teams or even a solo developer. Moss is the only game on this list that I'm aware of to have a proper studio attached, and I'm very interested to see what the genre can be when a studio with resources takes it on. Moss Books 1 and 2 were a lot of fun, and Book 2 is one of my all-time favorite games. But at the same time, there's a gap between the promise of the metagame genre and what Moss actually does. We don't know yet if there will be a Moss Book 3, but just in case those teasing sequel hooks pan out, I'd like to talk about what I think could be done to fill that gap. I've organized these ideas from least important to most important, which unfortunately is also least to most difficult as I understand it. Earlier ideas support the later ones, so while they can be implemented individually, they're meant to all contribute to one big, important, comprehensive idea that I think will fill the gap. Before we begin, spoiler warning! I'm going to be talking extensively about the story of Moss Book 2, so if you haven't already played the games, then you should click off now and go do so. Seriously, they're great, and I'm going to completely spoil them, so get out of here. Okay, are they gone? Let's go. We'll start at the bottom. I would like to see a more complicated relationship with Quill. Friends, even good ones, don't always get along. This is especially true in stressful situations. There are many possible reasons this could happen: misunderstanding each other, disagreement over what's important, or even manipulation by outside parties. Any or all of these things could lead to friction or even full-blown schisms between the player and Quill. While this might be painful in the short term, it gives the relationship a narrative arc, making it more satisfying in the end. Next idea. Another way to deepen the player's relationship is to let us talk to Quill. Up to now, we've been silent, but readers don't have to be silent. Tylen's reader talked to him, albeit in a menacing hiss. Several times, Book 2 urges us to help Quill manage her emotions, to ensure that her passion doesn't surpass her means, to lift her up from the emotional burdens that make her vulnerable to things that feed on anger. This is great. It's the perfect role for the player to take, but without any way to communicate with her, we can't really do it. So the game is asking us to take on a responsibility that we have no means of exercising. Additionally, being able to express ourselves gives the player space to define our relationship with Quill and make it unique to us. For instance, is the player warm and supportive, confident and empowering, calm and insightful, or maybe a little bit weird? And what does that mean for Quill? Does our presence help her keep hold of hope in dark moments? Muster confidence to rise to major challenges? Approach situations rationally rather than rush in? Or even come up with bizarre, unexpected strategies that the bad guys could never account for? This also offers new forms of social collaboration. We can turn over important questions together, questions where Quill and the player both have pieces of the puzzle, and things only become clear through discussion. The recent Lord of the Rings Gollum video game is strongly reviled, but it does have one interesting mechanic. Gollum has a split personality, so to make moral decisions, you must win an argument with the other half of your personality. Similar moral discussion with Quill could go far towards making the player feel like a bigger part of the story. And speaking of moral arguments, I would like to see a story that's more morally complex. Moss Book 1 was a straightforward fairy tale. Book 2 begins expanding the moral complexity of the story and setting, and the narrative is so much better as a result. Chiefly, readers can be a force for good, but they aren't always. Our time with Quill has been an unqualified good for her, for us, and for Moss. But for us to be in Moss opens the door to others who can do terrible evil. How do you balance that? An important note here. Being morally complex is not the same as being morally gray. Anti-heroes and questionable actions in the name of the greater good aren't necessary in this story. Rather, I'm describing the need to balance various moral necessities, to weigh risks and rewards, to navigate through different priorities. For instance, Quill and Veda are both good people who believe that lives matter, that Moss must be free to chart its own destiny, and that readers can be a force for good. But during Book 2, they very strongly disagreed about Argus's plan to unite the glass, leading them to take very different paths. But neither point of view was unreasonable. Quill was right that we needed to defeat the arcane or face total destruction. But Veda was right that giving a reader, any reader, the power to control fate also risked total destruction. So what do? What's more important? To use great power for good, or to reject it for being too easily misused? Even if it's not misused, to what extent does the power of the glass reduce the world of Moss to a plaything for the readers? Should an artifact that has been at the seed of every war in Moss be allowed to exist? This complexity leads me to my last and most important suggestion, the one to fill the gap, the one that all the others are there to support. A branching story. The central conceit of all metagames, including Moss, is that you, yourself, the player, are part of the story. You are not playing someone in the story, you are in the story. But while Moss acknowledges you as you're not actually part of the story. Everything is on rails and will proceed in a fixed manner no matter who you are or what decisions you make. To be part of the story, you need to have the same power as the other characters. The power to alter the outcome of events. To give the player this power, I think Moss Book 3 needs a branching story in the style of Mass Effect or the Stanley Parable, where decisions unlock alternate paths and you can't always predict where a choice will lead. To introduce how powerful this could be, let me bring in my experience from Book 2. After you and Quill fail to rally the sprites, Adurin entices you to follow him with promises of glass, leads you to fight the Keeper, then takes you to the Room of Realms to go to the Mountain Kingdom. But Quill realizes that she doesn't understand what's going on, so she should go talk to Argus before following Adurin. But when she waltzes into the throne room, Tylin ambushes her, takes the glass, kills Argus, and kicks the player out of Moss. In terms of narrative effect, that's a great scene. But for me, it happened differently. The difference was very slight, but it made the scene hit significantly harder. You see, I'd been on the fence about following Adurin from the start. So when we got to the Room of Realms, I decided I'd had enough. Like Quill, I decided that we needed to know more before going after the glass. So I gave Quill a speech to that effect, I was recording my playthrough, and sent her back to the throne room. No cutscene of her deciding to turn back. Then, just as normal, Tylin attacked us in the throne room, we lost the glass, Argus died, and I got kicked out of Moss. Exactly the same as normal, right? Well, not quite. One thing was different. Who made the decision? In my playthrough, the responsibility for this terrible event didn't fall on Quill. It fell on me. I made the decision. The glass was lost because of me. My champion was wounded because of me. Argus was dead because of me. Because I failed to anticipate a predictable ambush. And as I pushed on, I had a nagging question in the back of my mind. Even if I find Quill alive, will she want me back? Will she blame me for Argus's death? Will she ever trust me again? Now, of course, that fear never came to pass, because as far as the game is concerned, Quill made that decision, and that's that. But what if it did? What if Quill does blame me for Argus's death, and I'm stuck with Zahima until I can earn her trust back? Or maybe she doesn't blame me, and we have a heart-to-heart that reinforces our bond. Or maybe whether she's relieved or disgusted by my return depends on whether my advice up to that point has been good. So far we've focused on one event, but ideally you would have an interlocking web of paths and decisions, with different choices unlocking different paths or different possible outcomes for events. Let's make up some events to explore this concept. Note that these aren't meant as suggestions for how the story should go, just as ways to illustrate how a branching story might work, and I might not get Quill's personality quite right. We'll consider 3 hypothetical events. 1, an encounter with an enemy, we'll call him Dragon, who Quill cannot defeat. 2, a major strike by the Big Bad, we'll call him the Emperor, aimed at decapitating all resistance. 3, after the strike, Quill is separated from all her allies and needs to reorient and come at the problem of the Emperor from a new angle. In Event 1, we're presented with an enemy that the player can tell is probably too strong to defeat. Yet they must be confronted, so the player has 2 options. You can either go in for a direct confrontation, or you can sneak in and look for a weak point. If you go for a straight-up fight, Quill loses handily, escaping with both physical and emotional wounds. If you choose stealth, things get interesting, because you're not the only person in this equation. Quill can make decisions as well, and Quill is a mouse of action. So although you advise her to be sneaky, she elects to ignore you, the result being that she still attacks Dragon and still loses. This may seem like it undermines the point of offering the player a choice in the first place, but it'll have consequences in Event 2, where the Emperor strikes back. Time has passed, further trials and travails have been had, and now the Emperor has found where Quill's allies have been operating from and come down on them with overwhelming force. Again, there is more strength than you can fight off, and again you are faced with 2 options. Fight to save your friends, or retreat and try to rescue them later. Quill's natural instinct remains to charge in and save her friends, but she remembers what happened in Event 1, and that affects how she'll act now. Suppose you're as gung-ho as Quill. You chose to fight in Event 1 and decide to fight again in Event 2. Quill will fight, but when it becomes clear that this isn't a fight she can win, she remembers the last encounter and retreats, starting a high-energy escape sequence. Or maybe you chose to fight in Event 1, but since it didn't work out, you've decided to change tactics and ask Quill to retreat. She will. Like you, she learned from the fight with Dragon that there are some fights you just can't win. So she retreats, triggering a stealth sequence as you try to escape. Or suppose you decided to sneak in Event 1, but you've been watching Quill become stronger and more capable and have more confidence in her ability, so you tell her to fight. Likewise, she trusts your judgment. You were right last time, so you're probably right now. She fights as hard as she can, desperate to save her friends. She gives it everything, but she still loses, ultimately falling injured into a river and being swept downstream, washing up somewhere distant. Or perhaps you're the calculating type. You could tell that Quill couldn't win in Event 1, odds look worse now, and it's not going to do her friends any good if she's captured with them, so you tell her to retreat. Quill listens. The last time she ignored your advice, it ended badly. She retreats, starting the same stealth sequence as the fight-retreat option. But let's make things more interesting. Say that you didn't just tell Quill to sneak in Event 1, you've been telling her to avoid conflict at every opportunity. That may well be sensible advice, but from Quill's perspective, it seems like you think she's too small or weak or stupid to be a proper hero, and she's been growing more and more resentful. So now, when you tell her to retreat, she not only doesn't listen, she gets angry and accuses you of dismissing her. She's had it, and she's going to fight. Fight she does, as hard as she can, but ultimately she loses and washes down the river, as in the sneak fight choice. In this instance, even though you made the same decisions during the big turning points, the sum of your actions during smaller events has altered the outcome. As we enter Event 3, the story path diverges entirely. In all cases, the Emperor has captured Quill's allies and locked them in the dungeons of the Mouse King's castle. In the case of Fight, Quill flees into the forest. She gets away, but is left battered from the fight and completely lost, so she decides to make camp for the night to figure out what to do. You, the player, are feeling a bit down. You feel like you're consistently making bad choices and getting Quill hurt. During the downtime at the camp, you decide to bring this up with her. Quill comforts you, saying that she wouldn't go along with your suggestions if she thought they were bad ideas, and reminding you that even just you being there has been an enormous help. You are her friend. You took down the Arcane together, and she knows in her heart that as long as you're together, you can do anything. On that note, the two of you call it a night. The next morning, Quill wakes when she's attacked by a crow. This starts a minor boss fight. The crow spends most of his time out of Quill's reach, so the fight depends heavily on you manipulating the environment, breaking his perches or whipping branches into his way. Together, you defeat the crow, who starts loudly complaining about how making a living is so much harder since the Emperor showed up. Quill seizes on this and manages to broker an alliance. If she'll go after the Emperor, he'll fly her into the castle to rescue her friends. And won't eat her. Probably. In the case of Fight, Retreat, or Sneak Retreat, Quill sneaks out of danger, but then has to figure out where to go next. After weighing your options, the two of you decide to return to her village in the clearing in search of the Namelhook family, the castle architects. After a harrowing journey, she makes it home and must convince Grandpa Namelhook to help her sneak into the castle and rescue her friends. Quill is a forceful personality, but her persuasive ability is hit or miss, so you have to guide her in convincing him to help you. If you pull it off, he leads you through the labyrinthine passages below the castle. If not, Quill's boldness nevertheless inspires his son to help. He doesn't know the castle as well, so he can't lead you through the labyrinth, but he knows a passage that is poorly guarded. You can get in that way. You just have to go through a small guard detachment, which turns out to be a minor boss. If you chose Sneak Fight or consistently avoided conflict, Quill washes injured downstream and comes to rest on the banks of an underground river, among the damaged and mostly disabled forged soldiers she was fighting. She staggers her way along, wounded beyond your ability to heal, and too weak to do much fighting. So you have to control the damaged forged constructs to defend her from creepy cave crawlers that are attracted to wounded prey. Eventually, she reaches the end of her strength and collapses, leading to a last stand with your battered automatons. As the creepy crawlies are about to overwhelm you, a party of moles arrives and drives them off. They heard the commotion and came to investigate, and their grumpy doctor matron nurses Quill back to health. But Quill is demoralized from repeated losses. Now you must rally her, tell her that you believe in her, that she's still a capable warrior, that she is equal to this task as long as she's smart about it. Depending on your previous actions, you may also need to convince her that you really do believe in her, despite saying, "No, don't do that," so many times. Succeed, and Quill will enlist the moles to help her take down the Emperor, digging up into the ruins of the Warden's Forge and getting inside the castle that way. Fail, and she may give up the glass completely, passing it on to one of the moles. Now you follow the same path through the forge, but paired with the mole commander, and leading his party of soldiers in a light RTS-like experience. Whether Quill has forsaken you for good, or will return later at a critical moment, is uncertain. Spoiler warning, the grumpy Dr. Matron scolds her until she caves, and she shows up at the climactic final battle, when all seems lost. As you can see, these choices and challenges added up to 5 different story paths. Each one has different effects on the player and Quill, different allies and enemies, and even different gameplay styles. You want the player to sit down and play through from beginning to end without feeling the need to go back to a previous save point because they made the wrong decision. No matter what path they take, they have a grand adventure and reach a satisfying conclusion. The player's decisions also don't take away Quill's agency. Quill and the player are deuteragonists, both influencing the direction of the story. Whether she listens to the player or not is up to her, and is influenced by how the player treats her. Even when she does do as the player asks, her decisions about how to execute the player's plan can decide the outcome. The two of you are taking calculated risks based on your experience of the story so far and on your experience of each other. How you affect Quill is just as important as the quality of your judgment. As you can probably tell, this can get very complicated very quickly. Even just these few choice points result in drastically different paths through drastically different environments. This means building levels, writing, voice acting, animating, and coding a complex web of events and places, which could require significant dev time. But it delivers on Moss's core idea, that the player is part of the story. It fills the gap. You aren't just on a sightseeing train through Moss. Like Quill, you're charting a course through a complex, unpredictable, and perilous adventure. It's work. It's a lot of work. But if it can be accomplished, then Moss will truly deliver on the promise of its concept and has the potential to become not merely a popular VR action platformer, but the golden standard for VR storytelling. And there you have it. My thoughts on how to make Moss even better than it was in Book 2. Thanks for listening to an amateur ramble about story and game design. If these ideas seem interesting, I recommend checking out Glitched. Glitched is another metagame from the list I showed you before, but unlike most of the other entries, it has a branching story that takes a serious look at the morality of what you are doing. Literally playing a game with people's lives. It hasn't released yet, but the demo impressed me, and I highly recommend watching this project. That's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Bye!